They called her names, laughed at her scuffed boots, the kind you'd expect to find on someone cleaning up the mess, not competing for a $250,000 rifle. They whispered behind polished sunglasses and champagne flutes, asking how someone like her slipped into a billionaire-only contest. To them, she was a joke, a misstep in their perfect little world of elite weaponry and inherited pride. But 10 shots later, when the dust had settled and the echoes had faded, the only sound left in that range was silence and shame. In a desert drenched in sunlight and arrogance, surrounded by gold-plated rifles and handshakes worth empires, a quiet woman with tired eyes and a steady grip rewrote the entire narrative. You won't believe what she carried in her heart, or how each shot wasn't just aim. It was memory, grief, and grace, delivered with military precision. Before we dive in, tell us where you're watching from. And if you've ever seen dignity outshoot arrogance, this one's for you. Nora Quinn stood at the edge of the shooting range like a shadow misplaced in the sun. Mid-30s, sun-worn skin, boots that had seen more dirt than marble floors, and hands that still bore the quiet tremble of memories she never spoke of. Once a military field medic, she'd stitched torn flesh under enemy fire, whispered comfort to dying men, and carried her brother's body out of a flood zone the government never acknowledged. That brother, her only family, had waited for benefits, for justice, for someone to care. He died waiting. Since then, Nora had drifted on the edges of society, working night shifts at a rural clinic, returning to a rusted trailer that creaked with every gust of desert wind. She didn't belong in rooms filled with gold-rimmed glasses and Rolex wrists. She didn't try to. Veronica Alden, on the other hand, moved like she owned gravity. Late 20s, camera-ready smile, sleek ponytail, and the confidence of someone who had never heard the word no and believed she never would. The daughter of a billionaire arms magnate, Veronica had been born into titanium luxury, flown to international shooting events since she was a teen, mentored by Olympic champions, dressed in tactical gear that cost more than Nora's entire truck. She wasn't just a competitor here. She was the face on the promotional posters. To her, this contest wasn't about proving skill. It was about showing dominance. The setting couldn't have screamed contrast any louder. A private arms expo in the Mojave Desert. Invitation only. The sand blistered under the weight of luxury tents and steel booths. American flags flapped against the sky as drones buzzed overhead, capturing every angle for exclusive streaming networks. Gun cases glistened like jewelry boxes. Rows of observers sipped iced bourbon under shaded canopies, while contestants zeroed their scopes in the heat. But Nora didn't speak. She watched. From the moment she stepped into that arena, eyes followed her, some curious, others dismissive, most amused. Her name had been scribbled in faded ink on the participant board, tucked between corporate sponsors and military royalty. She wasn't supposed to be here. Her invite came from a friend who owed her a favor, a last-minute replacement for someone who'd canceled. She considered turning back. Her fingers hovered near the truck keys in her pocket more than once. But then she thought of her brother, of the medals still packed in the shoebox he never opened, of the rifle leaning in her duffel, one he had trained with before the illness came. She was never one for glory. But this was for him. So she stayed, quiet and still, while the world around her swirled with noise, money, and pride. The moment Nora stepped toward the equipment table, whispers spread like wildfire. It wasn't just her worn clothes or her silent presence. It was the simple fact that she didn't look like she belonged. One man in designer shades leaned toward his friend and muttered, "Is this some kind of charity stunt?" Another laughed, loud enough for Nora to hear. $10 says she doesn't hit a single one. Veronica Alden, already basking in attention from the cameras and commentators, spotted her then, shoulders squared, a smug smile spreading across her face like a challenge she was already sure she'd won. She sauntered over with the grace of someone used to being the center of gravity. "I didn't know this was open to volunteers," she said, eyes flicking over Nora's mismatched gear and dusty boots. "Did someone sponsor you, or are you the goodwill contestant of the day?" Nora didn't answer. She placed the rifle case gently on the table, unlatched it with steady fingers, and began assembling her weapon. An older model, cleaned meticulously, nothing fancy. Each click of metal into place echoed louder than the chatter behind her. A few onlookers chuckled, expecting her to fumble. She didn't. Her movements were measured, precise, almost reverent. The kind of discipline you don't learn at expos but in places where mistakes mean someone dies. She took a slow breath and raised the rifle, sighting in. And in that moment, the noise faded. The laughter, the heat, even the shimmer of sun off polished gun barrels, all of it fell away. Time bent around her. Her vision narrowed to the target, but her mind slipped elsewhere, to a dark room filled with folded chairs and silent salutes. Her brother's funeral. The crisp triangle of a flag pressed into her hands. The silence that came after the last note of taps, and the promise she made when no one else was listening. Veronica's voice broke the spell. "Do you even know how to shoot that thing?" she asked, tilting her head, voice dripping with mockery. "This isn't some backyard squirrel hunt, sweetheart." Nora lowered the rifle just slightly, enough to meet her gaze without flinching. Her voice came quiet and firm. "We didn't have a choice. We learned fast." For a moment, even Veronica blinked. The crowd leaned in. There was something in Nora's tone that didn't belong to games or pride. Something ancient, heavy, and unshakable. But the pause didn't last. Veronica smirked, then turned dramatically to the audience. "Tell you what," she said, raising her voice for effect. "Let's make this fun. Final round. Duel style. 10 shots. Side by side." She looked back at Nora, eyes glinting. "Winner takes the prize. Loser walks off knowing exactly what she is." The crowd erupted in cheers, laughter, even some boos. It was a show now, and everyone had front-row seats. All eyes turned to Nora, waiting for a response. But she just looked down at her rifle, then back at the range. No words, no smile, no reaction, just silence. The final round was set beneath the searing desert sun, where heat shimmered like ghosts above the sand. Spectators crowded behind velvet ropes, cell phones raised, eyes hungry for spectacle. Veronica Alden took her place first, confident as ever, her designer shooting gloves smooth against the grip of her high-end custom rifle. With the poise of a seasoned competitor, she fired her first shot. A perfect hit. Applause. The second, just a millimeter shy of center. Another cheer. Each shot followed with practiced rhythm, her stance choreographed, elegant, deliberate. She smiled after the 7th round, even tossed a wink toward the cameras. When she stepped back, her score was near perfect. The crowd roared. She turned to Nora with a smirk that said, "Now, let's see what you've got." Nora stepped forward slowly, cradling the older rifle like it was something sacred. Her boots left faint prints in the sand. She didn't glance at the crowd, didn't acknowledge the hum of drones overhead or the silence that had now taken root among the guests. She adjusted the strap around her shoulder, settled her body low, and let her fingertips rest along the barrel. For a brief second, her hands trembled, not from fear, but from memory. Then stillness, absolute stillness. She breathed in heat, grief, and sand, and exhaled stillness. The first shot rang out, crisp and final. The bullet met the target dead center. A ripple passed through the crowd, not applause. just the sharp intake of breath. The second followed. Again, perfect. Nora's face didn't change. She didn't flinch. The rifle seemed an extension of her body, each movement fluid and quiet. The third shot landed center as well. The applause had stopped now. No one moved. Inside Nora's mind, it wasn't a shooting contest. It was her brother's voice, faint and smiling, urging her to breathe through the shot. It was summer evenings with tin cans lined on fences. It was blood on her hands, enemy fire overhead, a soldier whispering, "Thank you," as she pinned a tourniquet and fired back with the other hand. Each shot was layered with something far heavier than competition. They were offerings, reminders, goodbyes. By the fifth shot, Veronica's confident smile had vanished. She crossed her arms tightly, shifted her weight, her jaw tightening with each trigger pull Nora made. The sixth and seventh rounds were flawless. The eighth, silent perfection. The crowd had become still, as if afraid to breathe too loudly. Veronica's eyes darted toward the scoreboard, then back to Nora. Her arms dropped to her sides, her body tense. For the first time, the woman who always performed for cameras looked like someone unsure of where she stood. Nora took position for the ninth shot. She paused, not to steady her breath, but to remember. The image of her brother laughing, holding up a soda can, daring her to outshoot him. She squeezed the trigger. Bullseye. No sound followed. Not a cheer, not a gasp. Only silence so complete it felt physical. Then came the 10th. This one she took longer with. Her eyes narrowed. Her grip was firm. The desert wind shifted ever so slightly, but Nora adjusted instinctively. And when the shot rang out, the air itself seemed to fracture. Another perfect hit. 10 for 10. She stood slowly, lowered the rifle with the reverence of someone laying down a memory. Her expression never changed. No smile, no triumph, only peace. She turned to Veronica and, for the first time, met her eyes. There was no gloating in that gaze, no challenge. Just a quiet truth that said, "You never really saw me. But I was never here for you anyway." Veronica stepped forward, her voice sharp and unsteady, trying to fill the silence that now wrapped around the crowd like a weighted curtain. "Who even are you?" she demanded, her bravado cracking just enough to reveal the bruised pride beneath. "You're not just some nurse with lucky aim, so what's the truth? Who are you?" The air held its breath, the audience waiting for the reply, some out of curiosity, others out of shame they didn't yet understand. Nora didn't answer. She didn't need to. Because from the back of the crowd, a slow, deliberate voice rose like a long-buried truth surfacing. "She trained my best marksmen in war zones most of you only see in movies," the voice said. Heads turned. Stepping into view was a tall, broad-shouldered man with a silver beard and eyes that held the weight of years, retired General Patrick Harlan. His uniform wasn't on, but his presence was unmistakable, reverent, final. He walked closer, eyes fixed on Nora, with the kind of respect that can't be bought or performed. "We called her Doc Quinn," he continued. "She was the reason most of my boys came home. She could shoot straighter with one hand and stitch with the other. And when our best lost their nerve, she steadied them. With words, with fire, whatever it took." The murmurs began. Recognition, regret, confusion. Veronica's mouth parted slightly, her tongue caught between disbelief and humiliation. Nora finally spoke, but not to gloat. Her voice was soft, almost too quiet to carry. "I didn't come for the prize," she said, her gaze fixed on the target in the distance. "I came because these—" She gestured gently to the rifle, then opened the small ammo box beside it, now empty. "These were my brother's, his last 10. The only rounds he had cleaned, polished, and left behind when the system failed him. Each one I fired today wasn't for score. It was goodbye." Her voice didn't waver, but the silence it left behind did. The weight of her words crushed whatever was left of Veronica's pride. She took a half-step back, eyes flicking to the cameras, then to her father, Miles Alden, the arms magnate, who now stood frozen in the crowd. His hands were clasped too tightly, jaw clenched, as if he knew his daughter's arrogance had just been undone by something money couldn't touch. Nora turned back to the stand and gently laid the rifle down, not like a competitor returning borrowed gear, but like someone placing flowers on a grave. It was the final act, a farewell, not just to her brother, but to the need to prove anything to people who would never understand what real service, real loss looked like. That simple act, rifle cradled in both hands, lowered with care, became the most powerful gesture of the day. Not a victory pose, not a raised fist, just peace, just quiet revenge. And not a single person could meet her eyes. Veronica didn't say another word. Her footsteps crunched against the sand as she turned away from the podium, shoulders no longer held high. She didn't look back. The crowd that once applauded her now watched in silence, unsure of how to respond to a woman who had walked in with the world at her feet and walked out with her pride in pieces. There was no winner's speech, no champagne toast, just the long, slow unraveling of arrogance in the face of something far greater, truth. Nora stood quietly by the shooting stand, her hands folded in front of her, the rifle already placed to rest like a chapter closed. A representative from a high-profile weapons conglomerate approached her, flanked by PR executives and eager assistants. "We'd like to make an offer," he began, his voice overly polished. "A multi-year contract, sponsorship, a public campaign. We'll give you a platform like nothing else. Millions." Nora didn't blink. "No," she said gently. "I already had a platform. It was a battlefield, and it was enough." The man hesitated, stunned as the cameras nearby caught every word. She turned back to the crowd, her voice louder now, not commanding, but clear. "Instead, I'll be using this attention to open a free training program for veterans, for women who never got the chance to serve or be seen, for girls told they weren't strong enough to protect anything." Her words weren't grandiose. They were measured, like every shot she had fired. Deliberate, rooted, final. Applause broke out slowly, like people needed permission to feel what they were feeling. But then it swelled. The same spectators who once scoffed at her now clapped with reverence. The same influencers who had posted jokes now angled their cameras respectfully. A transformation had occurred, not to Nora, but around her. She had not changed. The world had simply been forced to see what was always there, the humility, the strength, the fire. Somewhere near the front, a little girl in a sun hat tugged at her mother's sleeve, then walked up to Nora with wide eyes. "Will you teach me?" she asked, voice small but brave. Nora knelt down, smiled, and replied with the same quiet force that had silenced billionaires. "Only if you promise to protect, not impress." The girl nodded solemnly, as if receiving something more valuable than any trophy. The crowd began to disperse, leaving behind the scent of dust and warmed metal. Tents were being folded, banners lowered, yet something lingered in the air, a presence, a message, an imprint. As Nora gathered her gear and walked off the range alone, the final image wasn't flashy. It wasn't televised or shared in sound bites, but it burned into memory all the same. The sun dipped low behind the mountains. Shadows stretched across the sand like history unfolding. The range was empty now, but one woman had left echoes that would ring for years. She didn't come to win, she came to remember. And in doing so, she reminded them all, respect isn't bought. It's earned in silence, one bullet at a time. In a place built to showcase power, it was her stillness that echoed loudest. No trophy raised, no victory speech delivered, just a quiet woman who carried her brother's memory, her country's scars, and a strength that couldn't be dressed up or sold. And in that silence, a truth landed harder than any round ever could. Have you ever felt small in a room full of power, only to realize your story was bigger than theirs? If you've ever been underestimated, like this video, share it if you believe real skill comes without noise. And don't forget to follow us for more true stories of silent strength, where dignity moves louder than applause. Thanks for watching. Until next time, walk quietly and carry your truth.